everyone, this is Des, and you're listening to the Wellness Project, powered by Spotlight Coalition, episode number 73. I have some very exciting news to share. For the first time ever, I am offering a group program. I realize that many people are stressed, burned out, overwhelmed, and just plain exhausted. Sadly, many people don't have support from others, a healthy outlet, or a way to cope with the stresses of their everyday lives. If you can relate, then don't hesitate to sign up for the Mindful Monday Power Up group. This 4-week group will not only give you the support and encouragement you've been craving, but it will also provide you with a safe space to express yourself, healthy coping skills, practical tips you can implement into your daily life, and that sense of community you've been longing for. Create a life you love. Sign up for the waitlist today. You can find the link in the show notes, and I can't wait to see you there. Thanks so much for joining me today. As you know, if you've been listening to my podcast for a while, season 2 is mostly me interviewing professionals in the field of mental health and wellness. Well, this season, for season 3, I want to switch gears a little bit. This season, I'm going to focus mostly on speaking to people that struggle with mental health issues or obstacles in their lives. I want to talk to people about different things that have helped them, different therapy modalities or techniques, or just different things, coping skills that they've found to improve their lives and decrease their mental health symptoms. I thought it would be really helpful to listen to people that may have similar struggles as you, because as we know, not one single thing, coping skill or therapeutic technique helps everyone. So I wanted to get a large variety of people on here talking about the different things that help them. So today's guest is my very first one. I'm very excited. Today, I am speaking with Chris Bircher. He opens up about his lifelong struggle with anxiety and depression. He's very open and very vulnerable in this interview with me, which I really, really appreciate. He talks about his highs, his lows, things that have helped him, things that didn't help him at all, and the lowest point in his life, which actually pushed him to seek out therapy. I know you're going to gain a lot from listening to Chris speak about his personal struggles, and I think that you will even identify with a lot of what he's talking about. So help me welcome on Chris. Chris, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really looking forward to speaking with you because I think it's so important to talk with people about their struggles with mental health or just life issues in general and how they got to where they are and things that helped them a lot. Because as we know, there's no one definitive thing that can help with people's mental health issues or struggles. So I like to talk to a lot of different people about things that help them in case it could help anybody else. So thank you so much for being here and being open to this conversation.
Well, it's my pleasure, Desiree. Thanks for having me. I'm happy to share my story in hopes that, it touches someone or reveals a different path.
Absolutely. So to get us started, could you just tell us a little bit about your background, your story, and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, I'll struggle to keep it short.
That's okay.
But I mean, it's such a, every path is different. Surely there are only so many paths, right? I used to think that there were only like 10 types of people in the world and everybody sort of fell into one of these categories, but it's somewhere in the middle, right? I mean, there's a category of people who experience things similarly and may not relate. And I guess that's a long way to go to say that one of the things I'll sort of start with is in my journey, it's been difficult to find mentors and people to help, like coaches or therapists. If I miss saying that at some point, I just want to make it clear that I think that's one of the most important and most difficult things that we do is to find people that we can relate to that can help us. And that's why I like to do things like this. Maybe somebody out there is struggling to find somebody they mesh with or that, they resonate with or whatever. And I'm hoping that my story sort of does that. And so I was always like many people, I felt like a weird kid, right? I mean, looking back now, I know what things I didn't know then. And one was that I kind of came from no real trauma in my family of origin. My house, my parents were married and I had siblings that were older than me, but I sort of struggled with the neglect. And I don't say that my parents did anything wrong, but I needed more than they knew how to give me. So there was just that mismatch. And so I had a lot of unmet needs. And that sort of lays out my story, right? I mean, that sort of defines everything that happens after that. Of course, I didn't realize that until I was, almost 50, but it all sort of made sense when I figured out that that's what I was dealing with. And again, I don't blame my parents. Nobody did anything wrong, but that feeling like an outcast and feeling different, what I've learned from therapists is that a lot of people feel like that. And so that's sort of the starting place that a lot of people can relate to. Feeling like an outsider, I had friends, but I struggled with always sort of being on the fringes. And then at some point, I just sort of embraced that. And then it became difficult to tell, am I different because I'm trying to be different? It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, or am I really different from all these people? I guess it doesn't matter because it is what it is. My story is interesting because mostly it has to do with anxiety and depression. And I sort of leaned toward depression in high school. We didn't really have a name for it. I'm almost 50, so I was born in 1972. We didn't really have these names, words like depression and anxiety. It was just something you got over and didn't talk about. So it wasn't until later that I was able to put names on these things. But then I discovered cannabis. That sort of cured my symptoms for the short term. Only I would find out later in life that was, really just sort of putting off the inevitable. And then when I stopped smoking cannabis when I got into grad school, the anxiety hit me like a ton of bricks. It's like it had been building up for 10 years and then just sort of all came down at once. And I had my first panic attack in my late 20s. Sort of aware that I had these tendencies toward depression, sort of found a bad coping mechanism to deal with it. And then once I started taking my life seriously, started having anxiety, which expressed itself as emetophobia. I don't know if many of your listeners might not have heard of that, but it's sort of the fear of vomiting spontaneously in public. That's how my anxiety manifested itself. And so I knew I needed to get some help. At the time, my wife wasn't really, my first wife, I'm divorced from her now, remarried, wasn't supportive of that at all. Men did not have problems. They did not get help. They just stayed quiet and, went to work and mowed the grass. And so I didn't know how to deal with that except to hide it. I mean, if anything, I drank more alcohol and tried running, and I tried to do what I could. And it wasn't until I got divorced, that marriage ended, and I really kind of hit the wall, that I sought out help, and then went through about 10 years of talk therapies. And then only in the last couple of years, I sort of struggled with that, and we can talk about that in more detail. But then I discovered sort of these somatic therapeutic techniques like internal family systems and EMDR. Hypnotherapy would fall in there, although I've never done any of that. That really sort of started to fuse the analytical things that I had learned into action. That's a long way to go. Hopefully that's not too long, much information.
Not at all. That's great. I mean, thank you for sharing that and being so vulnerable. There's a lot I want to dive into because you just touched on so many great points in your story. So I guess the first thing I want to ask is, do you always remember struggling with anxiety and depression? I mean, do you have any memory of feeling happy and not struggling with anxiety and depression?
That's a really interesting question, because and it's fun to sort of be asked to think about it, because in so many ways I can't tell anymore if I knew then, but I know now, right? So I can look back at my 8-year-old self, and in IFS you do a lot of this inner child sort of work, and realize that I was going through depression. I was struggling, feeling shame for having emotions. Right. And so, I mean, depression and anxiety are weird words. For me, my depression was that I had a range of emotions that seemed inappropriate for the way an 8-year-old boy was supposed to feel. And that created the shame, which made me feel bad about myself, which gave me sort of a bad self-esteem, and I felt less than and unimportant, and even like I had no value. That feels bad. Is that depression? It's not like I don't know. Was it a biological thing that I was unable to deal with, or could a different type of experience, or dare I say parenting? Because again, I don't blame my parents. Helped me grow through that rather than sort of bottle it up, right? So yeah, I mean, as a kid, I bottled up my emotions, and that created a semi-helpless state of mind. But I wasn't aware of it at the time. I just knew that I felt like nobody else is like this, right? And it was, so really, it wasn't until I had a panic attack on a plane. It was the weirdest thing. I mean, I had stopped smoking weed. I didn't have that coping mechanism anymore. I hadn't flown in a long time. I was scared and I had a cold. And so I could sort of feel the, not to be graphic, but the mucus sort of moving around in my head with the changes in cabin pressure. And that
Mm-hmm.
made me feel nauseous, and all of this sort of happened. And so that was, and even then I didn't know what a panic attack was. I didn't know what anxiety was. I guess it was the late 90s. And those just weren't terms that were in the news or, that were in our vernacular. So even in that moment that I was having real anxiety, my first real experience with anxiety, I didn't know it was anxiety. But long story short, I think I experienced these things since I was first aware of anything.
Okay. And that must be hard for your parents too, because like you said, these words weren't in our vocabulary. There wasn't that much awareness about mental health struggles. So maybe even if your parents did know that something was off, maybe they didn't even know what it was or what to do or resources and just the awareness and education we have now.
I have a 19-year-old, 18-year-old, 15-year-old, and 5-year-old daughters. And it's great now because they've had this language. And to the degree that there is a genetic component, and to the degree to which I pass on these familial sort of neuroses, right, experiences, because I feel like I inherited some things from my parents and so on that aren't necessarily genetic. And an internal family system talks about that a lot. I have given them the power of the words, right, since they were little, which is different. My parents were sort of enlightened. They're kind of old hippies. So my mom would say things like, you need to try belly breathing.
Mm,
You're feeling stressed, so there were hints at attempts, to sort of try to deal with that. But what I've learned now is, they had their own problems. It's hard. I think you have to sort of be so sensitive and empathic and open to different personality types in general to be able to help people who maybe are experiencing things that you haven't experienced yourself. Parents do the best they can.
oh, definitely. And I think that's amazing that you give that power and education to your daughters. I think that's so important.
Well, I'm lucky, I guess, that I was paying attention.
Right. Right. Well, it sounds like you took your mental health seriously and took it in your own hands when you knew something was wrong.
This is pretty graphic too, but when I got divorced, there was a moment where I was like, I have to, this isn't fun and games. This is something I have to deal with. I mean, I had moments of suicidal thoughts, and I thought,
Mm,
okay, hold on. I can't not be there for my kids. I can't parent them effectively in this condition. I have to do something about that,
right.
which is kind of sad to say, I guess, because I don't know what I would have done if I hadn't had kids.
Right. That could
But
be scary to think about.
yeah, yeah. And I feel for people who are in that situation. But like you said, hopefully we have words and techniques and strategies and resources to help people that need it.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And so, something I want to touch on too is I know you said earlier that you did feel like you hid your mental health struggles a little bit. Were there people in your life that you did feel comfortable letting know that you had these struggles? I mean, I know you said your parents knew, but were there any friends or other family? I know you said your first wife wasn't that supportive.
No,
Mm,
there really weren't. I mean, it's funny how, feeling different is this like perpetual sort of isolation mechanism. It can easily sort of go from, I don't really feel like I fit in here, to I really literally have no allies in the world.
mhm.
But it's funny looking back, there were people in my family that were talked about as, what I understand now are that had sort of mental health issues. But the way that they were talked about taught me that that was something I didn't want to be. I didn't want to be
Oh,
talked about like that. You know what I mean? It's even to this day, it's funny. I have friends that I've been friends with for 30 years, and a lot of us got together fairly recently. And even in those moments, it's like there's only so far a person can go, because I don't know if this applies to everybody or if it's just me or if it's men, but it's like the male in the room who has the most limiting capacity to discuss their vulnerabilities is going to set the bar that you cannot pass in that
mm,
room. right? And so even if you got like six guys who are pretty open to talking about their stuff, if there's a seventh guy in that room who's not, that's going to determine how far you go, right? And so that was definitely the vibe I had with my friends, is that I was not going to get any help from
Okay.
them. You know what I mean? And so I think that's what led me to therapy, is like, I need someone that can talk to me about this stuff, because I literally don't know a single person. Now, having said that, I always identified better with women because they had a higher capacity, I think, to sort of discuss these things. But then I was always kind of scared to death of sexual relationships. I was very weary of like platonic relationships with women. Like if a woman was married and I wasn't married, I would be hesitant to develop sort of a meaningful emotional relationship because I would be afraid of crossing some boundary or something.
Right. And I think that's actually common. I think because, and I do want to get into this a little bit, the struggle that men have with those kind of relationships as well as seeking mental health help. So I think because, as you said, not all men are comfortable talking about these things and being vulnerable, whereas women are. And I think that because some men, they don't have exactly those meaningful, deep, vulnerable relationships. When they do with a woman, even though it's platonic, I think that sometimes that can get confused as something more, and maybe something that men are looking for that they haven't gotten in their other relationships. So I think that, I don't know, you could let me know if you agree or disagree, but I think sometimes that leads to confusion about the relationship and if it's platonic or not. I think sometimes men get confused because women are just vulnerable and open to those kind of conversations, and maybe men don't have that anywhere else in their lives.
That's amazing. I've never really heard it said like that, but yeah, I agree with that. And it sort of stimulates a whole lot of thinking, because yeah, it sort of suggests that I think this is a issue for men, because many of us want that kind of emotional freedom. We just don't know how to do it, especially with each other. And so when the opportunity presents itself, it feels so good, to be able to discuss our emotions or share that kind of thing, and sort of have that part of being human realized in the world, maybe for the first time. Yeah, that sort of good feeling is kind of confusing, because men are so poorly equipped to even think about their emotions. Now you've got a whole bunch of them. Well, what emotions? You may only have the awareness of like two or three emotions,
Right.
and lust is one of those. So it's like, oh, this feels good, so it must be sex, and yeah, that can be super weird. I never thought about it like that, but it makes total sense that for men who haven't dealt with their emotions before, to sort of tiptoe around in that emotional waters is delicate. Or
Yes,
can be.
definitely. Definitely. And I think that's why it gets a little confusing too. Whereas you said, if you were single and you were becoming friends with a married woman, I think probably even more confusing if you're not single and you do have a partner, and then now you're friends with another woman. I think that could get really sticky if men don't know, if they're emotionally
Totally.
vulnerable with multiple women because they're friends with women. And then there's all this guilt that goes into that as well.
Oh man, it makes total sense. Like, it's so completely obvious that would lead to problems, and that those problems would stem from basically a person's inability to sort of understand their emotional palette and where they fall.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, with that inability, I think that's the fault of our society, right? Because men are taught so much not to express feelings. I work with teens and kids, and my boys tell me all the time, like, crying is weakness, boys don't cry. And this is something that they're taught so much in our society, which leads to that inability to express their feelings because they're not allowed to.
Oh yeah, I hate to hear that still perpetuates, but it does make me wonder, because I think a lot, is it taught that you can't cry, or is it more we lack the reward systems that are set up for men are not there, right? That it's a penalty. I don't know that I was ever taught not to cry, but I knew I was going to be penalized for it. Right. And
Right.
I was not going to be rewarded for being emotionally vulnerable until I was. And now I don't know if that's an interesting part of my story or not, but I did realize at some point that my ability to relate to women did give me sort of a leg up when it came to actually emotionally connecting with someone, with a woman, right? And
Okay.
I think that's, like my wife now, I think my ability to form a relationship with her came from those very vulnerabilities that made it difficult to interact with other men. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? But it
Yeah.
gave me sort of an advantage. And that, man, we could talk about my whole dating history and the differences that I see in how women relate to what society paints as being the ideal man, this masculinity, whatever. And then this not thing, this reward and penalty idea, because I have been penalized many times for being not masculine enough. And I mean penalized by like not getting a date or not being considered attractive by whatever group of people because they wanted that masculine image. At the end of the day, 10 years into that marriage, they really didn't want that masculine image. They wanted something different, but nobody understood that. And that's kind of what happened, I guess, to a certain degree with my first wife. It struggles
Yeah.
between what we think we're supposed to be and, oh man, that's complicated.
It's very complicated. And I did want to talk about your first wife because you did mention that she was not supportive at all of your mental health struggles. Can you explain that a little bit? And can you maybe give advice to those that are in relationships with people who struggle with their mental health and what support looks like and what would be helpful?
Yeah, that's really good. And something else I just thought of, I feel compelled to say. I have a friend, one of my best friends, his wife at one point told me, this is fairly recently, and this is, I guess, goes a long way to sort of defend my ex-wife. And hopefully it's clear after I say the story. And she actually told me, I used to think anxiety was just made up. And I had zero sympathy for anybody experiencing anxiety. And she was kind of using air quotes when she said the word. I just thought people were making it up and I thought they were trying to get attention until she had experienced anxiety firsthand.
Mm.
And that changed everything. And I got so mad at her for her former opinion. But then I thought, well, this is a wonderful person. I love this person. I mean, I got to have sympathy for her. For the first time, I sort of understood that, like so many things, right? If you've never experienced it firsthand or known somebody who experienced it firsthand, your initial reaction may be, well, it's new, it's different, I don't understand it, so I'm going to rebel against it. And so I think there's that, if people haven't experienced anxiety, lucky them, or
Right.
depression,
Right.
then they're going to have trouble. And so, yeah, education and teaching. But then I think my first wife, what it came down to is her family history and the way that her male stereotypes had been determined. And this certainly didn't fit in with that. And so how do you encourage someone to be empathetic? Right. That's what that comes down to. But I
Right.
think being in TV and movies and books and TikTok, understanding that people have this suite of emotions and that is normal and good and all these things may help. But that's a tough one because I have this phrase I always say all the time that you can't make someone not believe in God. So if you have somebody who fundamentally just doesn't believe anxiety is a real thing, that it's just made up, I don't know how you break through that barrier.
Yeah, like you said, they may not believe it until they experience it themselves, unfortunately.
The bigger 30,000-foot view there is I just think we have to help each other understand that, the definition of the world cannot be made by a single person. So,
Yes.
the way that you see the world is not the way that it is. There's other people. It's a bigger.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think that would make the world a better place if more people believed that and were open to other ideas and other people's experiences.
And we're doing it, right? I mean, like your job, you talk to these boys who are saying, I can't cry. And you're like, well, actually crying is normal or whatever it is,
Hmm.
that all adds up to some cumulative thing. I have to believe that.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so, what do you think your past partners could have done differently to support you with your mental health struggles?
What I'm thinking is toward this IFS thing. I think you can't make someone get help. I wish for everybody now, including people that have wronged me or past partners or people I see in the world, if they would do their own, and I'll put it under the umbrella of personal growth, but I don't even really know what
Mm.
that means, and some introspective thinking, some philosophical consideration, some empathetic wondering about what other people need and want, sort of just that opening up realizing even further back, 50,000 foot, realizing that we're all connected and that it actually is important to understand where other people are coming from, because their health feeds back into your health, that sort of thing. Anything that we can do to get people that don't do that to do that, that's what I would prescribe, like to my ex-wife, say, it's like, you need to, and again, I don't know what else to call it, but insert, you need to experience some personal growth. You need to, have a life-changing experience. You need to connect with the earth. You need to have a psychedelic experience. I don't know, something to just sort of shake you up and help you understand that we're connected as a species to this universe. And I mean, I know that sounds like woo-woo. And a year ago, if I'd heard myself say that, I'd probably punch myself in the mouth. I mean, I'm really coming around to this idea that the solution lies in this awareness of the importance of connectivity. That's what I think is going to get people to change, is something that'll shift their mindset into being more holistic, more community, and less individualistic, isolated.
And it sounds like that goes back to that vulnerability piece, also being vulnerable with people about your feelings, because being vulnerable, that is connection. That's how you connect with people.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, do you have the language? I have the feeling, but I don't have the training.
Yeah, that's just what it sounds like to me. And maybe it sounds like maybe some people in your past haven't been open and vulnerable. That does shut down communication, that does shut down the relationship, that does shut down the support.
Totally. And I don't want to come across as like I'm blaming them, because again, with IFS, what I've realized is that I reach a point where, not because I want to or because I'm supposed to, I have this compassion for people who have been a part of my life that, I won't say wronged me, but, like my parents, maybe they could have done something different, or my ex-wife, maybe, she could have been more honest on our relationship or whatever. I don't wrong them for that. Now what I see is I see their trauma. I see their childhood pain. I see what they've been through, and their parents, and so on. And it all, I can just see it. I can see it. Like I could write it out and paint a picture of it for you. And so how can I possibly let that bother me? What I feel is compassion for, that has nothing to do with me. And what I want to tell them is you can address that. Surely you carry the weight of that around in your life, whether you're aware of it, whether you want to admit it. I'm not trying to say that everybody needs help, but maybe I am. And that's what I want. Like, that's how I would change it if I could. I would say you need to have a series of experiences that put you in touch with what's happened to you. It's like there's that book by Oprah Winfrey and her friend who's like a psychotherapist called What Happened to You. Have you heard of this?
I have heard of it, but I haven't read it.
Yeah, it's a good read. And so that whole premise is sort of like, when you run into somebody and you talk for a few minutes, I find myself kind of going, what happened to you? Especially with people that I find annoying. My biggest thing lately is these guys with the big giant pickup trucks that are super loud that scare me. They drive up next to me and the truck is so loud it scares me. I used to have this guttural reaction to just, if I had a gun, I want to shoot them kind of reaction. I just get so angry. And so I'm like, I got to change this. And so I've tried to shift that to, what happened to you that you have to show the world that this is your identity anyway?
Right. No, I totally get that. And I definitely want to get into IFS because it sounds like it's made such an impact on your life. So for our listeners, can you explain what exactly internal family systems is, how you discovered it, how it helps you?
I'll do my best. I mean, so this is it's a psychoanalytical tool model, they call it, that was developed maybe only in the past 20 or 30 years by a guy named Richard Schwartz. And the whole thing to me is serendipity. I mean, it was discovered serendipitously. I came into it serendipitously. It's just so weird. It's one of those things that hits you upside the head so many times, you have to kind of go, well, maybe there's something to this. And he learned about it from his patients. He was getting his PhD and sort of going through the clinical part and seeing patients, and they would tell him things like, and these were pretty, like schizophrenia, they were pretty serious trauma, childhood sexual abuse kind of cases. And they would say things like, well, there's a part of me that wants you to know that they feel mad about this. And there's another part of me. And they kept talking about themselves is that there were these compartmentalized, multiple personalities, right? So originally he's like, okay, they're all schizophrenic. And these parts didn't know each other. And so he just, instead, for a long time, he tried to deny it and, shift them into a different way of thinking. But eventually he just went with it. And after he had enough data and learned sort of how to talk to these parts, he realized that he could allow the parts to get to know each other, and that there was this hierarchy that looked like a system that resembled a family. So he called it, like, we have this internal family of parts that have experienced things in life. And my favorite sort of example is, this sort of happened to me, but I'll use it in like the third person. A kid is on the playground, no adults around. There's a couple of bullies that are threatening to beat him up, and he's super terrified. And in that moment, he doesn't know what to do. He's going to get pummeled. He doesn't know what to expect. You're literally terrified for your life in that moment, and there's nobody there to help you. You have this idea of maybe doing something funny that you saw on like TikTok or YouTube or TV, and you do something funny and the bullies laugh at and leave you alone, and you've shifted that. And so that person then realizes that I can use comedy to defend myself. So that in that moment, a part is born that figured out a way to protect some sensitive inner child that is vulnerable and easily picked on and naive and doesn't know how to defend itself. A protective part steps in front of that and says, I'm going to be funny to protect you from being bullied. I'm going to hide you. So right there, you have two parts, right? A part that's sensitive, that thinks it can't show itself to the world, that it needs to be protected, it has to hide. And another part that says we have to be funny all the time in order to keep ourselves safe. And there's a million different other examples. We do that. We have all these experiences in life that are, little micro episodes of trauma where we create some strategy, a part that helps us deal with it. And then the next time that comes up, the part jumps back up again. And so they talk about having a seat of consciousness that the parts will sort of occupy depending on whatever situation you're in. And what I've learned in my work is that, I have, 30 or 40 of these parts that have all learned something. And maybe it worked for a little while, but in my adult life, some of these parts don't work so well anymore. And so in the therapy, in the coaching, we let these parts say their piece. We let them trust that now we're older. A lot of these parts are still 8 years old, and that we can actually do different things and maybe give this part a different job, and it doesn't have to spend all of its time doing this. And maybe this part that's been hidden away from the world for so long actually needs to express itself, and it's now safe to do that. And all of this is sort of governed. There's all these language and ways to sort of define and describe this, but it all comes down to the family being led by what they call self with a capital S, which is sort of insert your favorite word, your true self, your soul, your authentic being, that can sort of regulate this. And the goal of the therapy is to find that, and to have that self with a capital S be able to take that seat of consciousness at will, instead of sort of being hidden from the world. And all I can say is it worked. And how I came about it is really interesting, because I didn't know what was happening to me. I decided to see a coach through this long, circuitous way of just sort of a lot of issues, but I ended up with this guy in a pretty neat path, and we just started working. He said, in order to work with me, you have to be a pretty good meditator. You have to be able to quiet your mind and focus on your body. And so we spent a few weeks doing specific meditations where I learned how to shut down my analytical mind and sort of try to feel sensations in my body. And I didn't know what I was doing. He never explained any of it to me. And then I started meeting parts and started having these experiences. And then time went by, and I felt different. I felt different day to day, and I couldn't explain what it was. I decided that the work that I'm doing is changing me. And so I'm going to continue to do it.
Wow. So you're still in IFS therapy now?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think the goal is to be able to spend more time in self so that I can do this kind of work on my own, like I meditate. But I'm not there yet. I want to learn.
Okay, that's great. And how long ago did you start IFS?
A little over a year. And I think the key is, for people that don't know about it, is I did 10 years of cognitive behavioral therapy. I'm a scientist. I'm a researcher. I have 3 degrees. I mean, I'm not just trying to say I'm smart, but I have a very analytical, scientific mind. See, cognitive behavioral therapy, talk therapy. I get it. I knew about all this stuff. I realized I was bullied as a kid. I realized my parents weren't there for me. I realized I was experiencing a little bit of neglect. And I realized I had this sort of codependency issue and low self-esteem, but I didn't know what to do about it. None of the talking did anything about it because I was trapped in my analytical self. And I didn't realize that a human being is not just your brain. There's this whole suite of other. And one of those things is our awareness of our body. And I really do believe our body holds a lot of energy, it holds a lot of memory, it holds a lot of power. I had spent my whole life ignoring that and as if it wasn't a real thing. And so that's what really did it for me, is being able to let go of my analytical mind and then start to apply that knowledge in a different way. I don't even really know how to talk about it, except to say that it's somatic instead of analytic or mental.
No, and I love that. And that's why I was so looking forward to speaking with you, because not one type of therapy works for everybody. I think it's really important to talk about all these different kinds that, you found something that really helps you. And I think that's really important because one thing isn't going to help everybody.
Like I was saying at the beginning, I mean, it's like it's almost completely subjective, but it's not, right? I mean, for every one technique, say there's 8 billion people, you might need 100 different techniques to capture all of that variation. It's not like you need 8 billion.
Right.
Like
right.
it's not that overwhelming. I mean, part of me really wants to like become a IFS coach, right? I'm not going to go back and get a psychology PhD, but something. I would love to help people do this because I find that it's so powerful. But I think the connectivity to your body for people who are analytical empaths with a high level of awareness, there's a type, right? I think I fall into some generalizable type that probably across all genders that is going to probably benefit from these types of strategies more so than someone else. You know what I mean? That's what I would love to see in therapy, is like a pre-screening app that could put you in a type and direct you to techniques that might work to sort of help. Part of that 10 years of CBT was that I just didn't find the right person and a combination of techniques. It's so hard.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's really important for people to hear. And now I didn't read this book, but it's always on my list of books that I really want to read. But have you read The Body Keeps the Score?
I haven't, but again, same. It's
Yeah.
kind of on my list too. That's what I'm talking about with the somatic thing. I really think there's so much, for me, untapped humanity. And I always think of things in terms of evolutionary, because I was an evolutionary biologist. So I think 10,000 years ago, we were probably way plugged in to these non-analytical parts of our humanity because, it benefited us. We could, whatever, sense the storm or, sense change, whatever. And we're on a path of reducing that, on a daily basis. Yeah, I mean, I would love to spend the rest of my life sort of. That's why I mentioned psychedelics, because I think I don't have any experience with that in a therapeutic sense, but that is a way, I think, to get in touch with our bodies. I don't know, that people are doing.
That's something we've talked about quite a bit on my podcast, is that we're so disconnected right now. I mean, there's so many distractions. I mean, at the tip of our fingertips, you have anything you could every distraction you could ever think of. So we're so disconnected. And I think that a lot of people are really feeling those effects right now. And, there's just burnout is just skyrocketing. And I think a part of that is that we really need to get back into connection of our mind, body, and our souls, because we're just in this kind of trance. We wake up and we go through the motions, and then we go to bed and do it all over again. And we're just completely disconnected from what makes us feel alive, what gives us that humanity.
Yeah, I can't wait to go back and listen to what you just said again. Because that is I wish I could spend every minute of my days addressing that issue for myself, for my wife, for my kids, for everybody around me, because the IFS is not a magic bullet. I'm not able to overcome that same iPhone addiction. And I wish I could, because that's exactly right. What are we missing out on? And again, that's why I think I'm the perfect spokesperson for this connection to body, because I didn't know what was happening. I came with this kicking and screaming, never would have believed any of this. Scientists, we need evidence, right? You can't just tell me I can get in touch with my body and it's going to change my life.
Right.
And I can't tell you how. Or I can't even really walk you through the steps. I can just say that in doing things like, journaling and meditation and trying to pay attention, it results in an effect. It's just not the way I was trained that the world works. But that doesn't mean it doesn't work like that.
Right. And that's powerful. That's really powerful. Well, Chris, thank you so much for this and telling us your story and being open and vulnerable. I mean, is there anything else that you want to tell our listeners? Can you tell them where to find you?
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess I talk about this stuff on my podcast, Knowledge Plus Experience Equals Wisdom. And you can find all of that on my webpage, which is www.chrisburcher.com, CHRISBURCHER.com. I just want to encourage people that have any inkling of interest in, I guess, like you said, sort of the body keeping the score, to know that there's a wealth of resources and easily doable things that sound silly, like journaling and meditation, that can actually produce meaningful changes.
Definitely. Well, Chris, thank you so much. And I'm going to put your links in the show notes. So everyone go check out Chris. And Chris, again, thank you so much for being here today.
Yep. Thank you for letting me be a part of it. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much to Chris for coming on and being so open and vulnerable, talking about all your different mental health issues that you had to deal with growing up. I really appreciate it. And I know that my listeners will as well. I hope you all got a lot of value listening to Chris's story about his struggles with anxiety and depression, as well as relationships in his life. And I know that some of you will be able to relate. If you want to look more into Chris, like I said in the interview, all of his links are in the show notes. So definitely go check him out and listen to his podcast. I really hope that you'll enjoy this change of pace with me interviewing people about their struggles with mental health and mental illness. I think it's going to be really, really beneficial. So thank you so much for listening. And please share this episode, share my podcast, share it with your friends or family, text it to a loved one, or just share it on social media and be sure to tag me. And I would really, really appreciate it if you could go into iTunes and give my podcast a review. It really helps with ratings and getting my podcast out to more people, which I think everybody should listen to it because I think it's really helpful and gives a lot of great tips. This is the month of self-love. So if you are interested in joining my 5-day self-love challenge, check out the link in the show notes, and that challenge will be emailed to you every single day. Go sign up because we could all do with loving ourselves some more. So go check that out. Again, the link is in the show notes.